Hi everyone, and welcome to this 8th video in our series on early learning. In this video, I'm going to show you how to teach your child the basic functions of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, your basic arithmetic. Because once children are able to master these 4 concepts, that gives them a very solid understanding of mathematics throughout their academic career. Now, it's important to note that the knowledge I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is based on information from the previous videos. So if you haven't yet, make sure that you watch the video on principles of early learning, the auditory and visual perceptual videos, and then also the video on numeracy skills that I released last week. Now, I have to admit, the functions of multiplication and division are extremely difficult for young children to understand. So on the whole, I'm mostly going to be focusing with you on addition and subtraction, and then at the end, I'm just going to lightly touch on multiplication and division. Let's start with addition. Addition is the first function we want to teach because it's the most straightforward of all of the functions. Now remember, we said in last week's video that you want to really teach your child the vocabulary of mathematics so that they're able to understand what is required of them whenever you give them a sum. So instead of only just using the word addition, you also want to say plus and sum these numbers and find the total and how much do I have all together. Now, addition is so easy to teach because children can add just about anything that they can count. And again, children can count just about any object. So remember that we want to always start with concrete objects first before we move on to symbols and worksheets. Now, you can give your child anything to add and to count. This could be things like stones or shells, buttons, sticks, hair bands, just about anything. And remember, you want to start by first just teaching them to add 1. So 1 plus 1, 2 plus 1, 3 plus 1. And you're going to do that all the way until you get to 10 plus 1. And then you're going to start adding 2, 1 plus 2, 2 plus 2. And so you're going to go through all of them until at the very end, you will finally get to 10 plus 10. So I'm going to show you some very easy activities that you can do with your child at home that uses household items. So a really easy idea, let me just grab it, for addition is this clothes hanger. And you'll see that I've added the sign here. And you are going to be using washing pegs as your counters. So we have put on the 2 opposite sides the amounts that we want to add. So you can put this on there with your child so that they can see it and then say to them, okay, we have 2 plus 2 and get them to count that makes 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. Another idea would be to use something that they already enjoy like Lego or Duplo. So very straightforward here. We have 3 plus 2, and your child can count that makes 5. I quite like the idea of using the 2 separate digits, different colors as well, just to help them consolidate what it is that they are having to do. Dice, so any board game that requires your child to use a pair of dice where they have to add the amount of dots to figure out how many blocks they have to move forward is great. So Monopoly, Snakes and Ladders, Checkers, any one of those. I've also made a really easy adding machine. And what I've done is I've literally just stuck 2 toilet rolls to a craft stick. And so the idea is that you are going to stick that on the wall and you are going to be throwing objects in there for your child to count. So for instance, if we use a die, let's see, if we add 1 plus 1, your child can count that gives us 2 objects. Now, if you have quite an adventurous, science-loving little one, then you can really extend this activity and make long marble runs for them to add their counters into. Once you've done that, you have now taught them to count the actual objects, and if they understand it, we can start moving on to the numerals and the symbols. So for instance, you can give them things like color by number, and I've just made a photocopy of a picture from a coloring in book, and I'll bring it closer. All the colors, everything that makes a 4, for instance, should be blue. And you'll see that I've mixed it up. So not only 1 plus 3 plus 3 plus 1 as well. And there your child will know which colors to color once they've figured out what the sum is. And get them to count, once they understand numerals, get them to add up your change or to add up Monopoly money, if you happen to have any lying around the house. And only once your child has fully understood how to use those symbols can you start giving them the math sums in this format. So the proper format of 1 plus 4 or 3 plus 1. When you start giving it to them in this formalized format, you might have to spend a little bit of time first explaining what the symbols mean. And I find especially the equal symbol is a good place to start before you're introducing plus, minus, times, and divide. The important thing to keep in mind as well is that in order to really foster a deep understanding of mathematics, you have to mix up the way in which you ask the questions. So instead of always saying, what does 3 plus 4 give us? You can say, what plus 3 gives us 7? Or when they're quite advanced, you can say, what are all the ways in which we can make a 7? Be it 5 plus 2, 3 plus 4, 9 minus 2, just to really get the brain working and understanding mathematics. I did want to chat to you guys about counting on fingers, because this is how your child is initially going to learn to do addition. Now, it's really important that they count on their fingers. Please don't discourage them from doing this. I know usually by about grade 3, teachers don't want them to be using their fingers anymore. But honestly, I feel that if your child still needs it after that, allow him to do it at home, because this is going to really allow him to see what he's doing on the paper. All right, so counting on fingers also progresses through various phases. In the beginning, when your child learns to count on his fingers, it's important to use 2 hands. So 3 plus 2 and have them count. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now initially, it really helps to have children tap the fingers to their chin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why? Because that gives them this tactile input as well to help them make sure that they're arriving at the correct number. Once your children can do that, they can usually learn to add using just the 1 hand or 2 hands together. So 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. Only once they can count all of the numbers in addition will they learn to do what we call counting on. And to be honest, many of us adults still do counting on. So you'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you won't count the 3, you'll go 3, 4, 5. And a little bit advanced from that is when you can do it in your head. So you start with 3, 4, 5. Okay, and you get to 5. So then counting on your fingers, like I said, is really important. So allow your child to do it as often as they need to as well. And then once your child understands addition, we can move on to subtraction. Now, with subtraction again, make them familiar with all the different ways in which you can ask this. So also use the word minus and the word take away. So to be honest, take away is my favorite phrase for teaching subtraction because it so clearly explains what you have to do. And remember, if you're using solid items to teach subtraction, like 5, for instance, if we have 5 minus 2, you want to take away the amount initially that has to be minused. Because if they're still lying around, there's a chance that your child might confuse the whole scenario and get to the wrong answer. Only once they are able to really do that can you start leaving these lying around, or say to them, if you have this many blocks and I take away 2, how many will you have left? For them to work out in their imagination what that would look like. So subtraction, like I said, you want to actually take away things. So a really fun activity is this subtraction monster. I've taken this from a coloring in book and colored it in, cut out the mouth and just stuck it on the back of a produce box. And so a wonderful way to show that if I have, for instance, 2 minus 1, I will only have 1 left, because your child can't see what they've just lost. It helps them only focus on what the answer should be. And then another idea, for instance, we speak so often about using our hands to get to the answer that something like a glove could also be really awesome. So what I've done here is I've taken an old glove and I've just quickly sewn some buttons onto it and some loops onto the fingers. And here you can use this the same way in which you would use your fingers. So for instance, if I have 5 and I'm just going to loop them, minus 2 and loop that one, your child can see that the answer, let's loop that one again. So 5 minus 2 gives you 3. There is a version of this where you can use surgical gloves that are lightly filled with sand. I just prefer this version because I feel it's a little bit more environmentally friendly. And remember, once your child has mastered how to do subtracting from 5, you can add a second glove so they can subtract from 10. Eating is the best way to teach subtraction. So you can make this really fun with treats and sweets, and to say, if you have 7 Smarties but you eat 4, how many will you have left? And another idea that I found that was amazing is to have the sum written down, whether you do addition or subtraction. You put that onto a key holder with a key, various keys, and then on the other side you have locks with the answers written on them. So for instance, you'll have keys that say 3 plus 4, or 4 plus 1, or 7 plus 2, and on this side you will have locks with the answers of 7, 9 and whatever. And your child has to work out the sum to know which key will match which lock. So great idea if you have lots of keys and locks lying around in the house. Then lastly, let's have a quick look at multiplication and division. So with these two, you really want to go very, very slowly. Usually, children are only actually formally introduced to multiplication by the second half of grade 2. So you can see that even for the older children in this series, the 5 and 6-year-olds, multiplication is going to be a difficult concept. Now at school, teachers start by not teaching multiplication and division, but instead they call it doubling and halving. So in other words, they're just teaching multiplying by 2 and dividing by 2. And I would suggest that this is a great place for you to start as well. And only do this once your child has consolidated addition and subtraction. So doubling, you can always, for instance, pack out fun items for them. So if I have 2 sweets and I have another 2 sweets, how much is that? 2 times 2 is how much? Or with rubbers or any sort of counter, you want to make it really physical and concrete for them. If you are going to be teaching multiplication, I find that putting things in a grid form really helps here as well. So here you've seen that I've simply done 3 times 3. But you want to make it very clear that it's 3 lines of 3 items all together, like with the hearts. And lastly, we get to divide. Now, as soon as you teach your child to share, you are in effect teaching them to divide. So great idea to teach them to share. If you and I, mommy and you and mommy, if we share, these cupcakes, how many will we each get? And once they get sharing between 2, you can add sharing between 3. So if your brother and I and yourself share this chocolate, how many blocks will we each get? And demonstrate, demonstrate, demonstrate. Especially with the more complicated functions, you want to show them physically as often as possible how this works in order for their brains to build those neural networks in understanding the concepts. So that is basically our video on the 4 functions. From next week, we are going to be having a look at concept development. Now, I just want to remind you again, these videos are free. You are welcome to share them. And I try and keep them as cost-effective as possible by always showing you ideas of activities that you can do using household items. Thank you everyone for joining me this week, and I'll see you next week.